Well, Rite Aid is the latest pharmacy chain taking a stand on the vaping epidemic. The company says it will no longer sell e-cigarettes in its stores, and it will begin to sell CBD products. That's the non-intoxicating compound of cannabis. In other words, it won't get you high. Joining us in studio is Dr. Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA Commissioner. Dr. Gottlieb, thank you so much for joining us. You just left the job, so we're glad to have you here on set. The FDA still hasn't come out formally with regulations per se on CBD. You're going to hold, or the FDA is going to hold hearings sometime next month. What's your stand? Is this stuff safe?
Well, look, what we don't know is the bottom line. And if you're having CBD for breakfast and CBD for lunch and CBD for dinner and you're ingesting it, there are health consequences, and there's a cumulative effect. It's sold as a drug product. We've seen some risks associated with that drug product. So at high concentrations and high doses, there are health concerns. What Rite Aid's talking about doing, based on what I've seen, is selling it as a cosmetic. It's hard to understand how they're going to sell it as a cosmetic without making drug claims around those products. Presumably, if they're selling cosmetics and just making beauty claims, they could potentially be doing that and not violating federal law. But if they're making drug-like claims that it helps treat pain or other things, they're probably going to trip over a federal regulatory line pretty quickly. So I'm not quite sure what they're doing here.
Is CBD oil supposed to make you prettier? I don't know. How? Why?
Well, I think the hype has gotten ahead of the science right now. You know, people are putting it in everything. We're seeing it in pet foods, for example. A lot of what the violative behavior that the FDA was seeing was CBD oil in pet foods, based on a presumption that, you know, if you leave your dog all day alone in the apartment, it could somehow calm the animal. There's no evidence for this.
Are we in a snake oil kind of moment for CBD?
Well, look, there are approved uses for it. So there's an approved drug, Epidiolex, by GW Pharma. So we know that these compounds, when they're delivered in specific formulations and certain concentrations, can have a therapeutic effect. And there might be other neurological diseases that could be treated with CBD oil. But a lot of the uses that we're seeing in these sort of consumer products that are being put forward right now, they don't look very credible. There's certainly no science to support it that would rise to the level of FDA satisfaction.
Can I ask you about the e-cigs as well? I was fascinated that Rite Aid is going to stop selling these products altogether. And understandably, there's been concern about teen use and getting more teens involved with vaping and then leading them to cigarette use. But if e-cigarettes can also transition people off of a more harmful product into a less harmful one, is it something that should not be banned? Is Rite Aid doing this because they're concerned about regulatory risk, or should the FDA be more clear about saying, hey, these are the use cases in which this could help public health, and these are the ones in which it could hurt?
Well, this wasn't exactly a profile in courage, in my view. If Rite Aid was concerned about regulatory risk, they'd pull the combustible products out. And when we did raids on Rite Aid and other establishments, they had about a 9.6 violation rate selling combustible products, cigarettes, to children. So they are not exactly good from a corporate compliance standpoint on keeping traditional tobacco products out of the hands of kids. So I'm not sure why they're doing this. What I do know is that when you look at a typical convenience store, about 30% of their sales are combustible tobacco products with a 15 to 20% gross margin. So it's hard for the convenience stores to let go of tobacco. I assume Rite Aid's having a problem from a sales standpoint, letting go of tobacco as well.
So they're not banning tobacco, and
right, exactly.
So they're going to ban e-cigarettes.
And that's exactly what you don't want them to be doing, because the e-cigarettes, while they're not safe, they're less harmful than tobacco. Interestingly, the e-cigarettes have a margin, a gross margin that's almost double combustible tobacco, but presumably they weren't selling a lot of e-cigarettes in those stores anyway, so they're not taking a big hit.
So I hear on the radio a lot of ads for a brand of e-cigarette where it is a personal testimonial that talks about how happy they are that they got off of tobacco by using this branded product. Whose name rhymes with cruel. All right? When you hear those ads, how does it make you feel?
Well, look, the question is whether those ads are making a claim that crosses a regulatory line. And they've been carefully lawyered, and so I'm not going to sort of comment on whether they're crossing the line or not. They might be stepping into a gray area with the kinds of ads that they're doing, where they're making modified risk claims. I don't think that's something that the regulators would want to target. If you're trying to educate currently addicted adult smokers about the potential to transition off of combustible tobacco onto what is a less harmful product, that's not low-hanging fruit from a public health standpoint, if that's how they're trying to position the product right now. Now, that said, they haven't come through the application process to be able to make modified risk claims around e-cigarettes, but I think we all accept that they're not safe, but they're less harmful than using combustible tobacco. But the final point I'd make is, if you're using combustible tobacco and an e-cigarette, you're probably not getting any health benefit. The way you get a health benefit is by completely switching off of a combustible tobacco product onto an e-cigarette.
And the e-cigarettes are not, I understand that they are, to the extent that they have nicotine in the juice that you
It's not just the nicotine,
inhale.
though.
But what makes them unsafe?
So we have data now, and I talked about this at a congressional hearing last week, where we see effects on tissue in the lungs that look like they're pre-malignant changes, direct effects on tissue. Now, again, I don't want to be alarmist and say that they're going to cause cancer at the same rate that combustible tobacco are. They are a lot less risky than using combustible tobacco, but they're not completely benign. They still have health effects. They still have direct effects on tissue. We've seen it in animal studies, and we've seen some of those data in human studies. And that's why we were so concerned about kids, because you didn't want kids initiating for the first time onto nicotine through e-cigarettes and get the harmful effects of e-cigarettes. And somehow the kids now perceive the e-cigarettes as safe, and they feel
benign.
It's something they can be using.
Vaping is actually one preferred way people consume or ingest cannabis.
Right.
And I'm curious, we talked earlier before, and you have not gone to a dispensary, but the claims that are being made in dispensaries in connection to what is being billed as medical marijuana are sky high, whether it be it stops the growth of tumors in people,
Right.
it treats arthritis, et cetera. I mean, every single thing under the sun apparently can be treated by some THC product. Do you think the FDA should step in? Do you think the role is there for the FDA to step in to regulate medical marijuana?
Well, FDA certainly has taken a role in terms of regulating in this space when people are making claims, and all the claims are violative. There's no substantial evidence to support these claims, certainly from the satisfaction of the FDA's regulatory process. Where the agency chose to enforce is around what we were calling at the time over-the-line claims. Claiming marijuana can shrink pancreatic tumor. Everyone accepts that isn't possible. In terms of the regulatory scheme, there is no federal regulatory scheme. Right now, it's illegal under federal law. I mean, in the future, if you were to contemplate a federal regulatory scheme, I think, unfortunately, people would look towards the FDA to be the regulator of choice, and you'd regulate the THC as a drug and in a recreational component under CTP, Center for Tobaccos. I don't think that's preferable. I think that'd be a bad outcome, but I think there's an inevitability that some people are going to start talking about that. Because there's a tension between the federal government and the states now that over the long run isn't tenable. It's going to need to be resolved at some point.
What do you think about this push to legalize in every single state? I mean, 33 states right now have either recreational or medical programs.
I think it's problematic because you look at the impacts of THC on the developing brain. The brain's still developing to age 25. It has an impact on executive function. It has an impact on working memory. And there's a cumulative effect. So if people are using THC on a regular basis, it's going to impact their function at work. And we're conducting a very, concerning natural experiment in this country by exposing so many kids to THC and now nicotine. That's going to have long-term effects. We're already seeing data where we see higher rates of schizophrenia and people have been exposed repeatedly to THC. So there are health effects of these products.
And then there's measles. So before you go, can you please help us figure out what the public health solution is to a problem that people first started talking about almost 15 years ago, and only this year are the cases starting to take off in a huge way?
Well, I think the public health solutions, unfortunately, are going to be to see more mandated, restrictive behavior in terms of requiring vaccination to enter schools, and maybe even, contemplating some federal mandates on local districts to try to get vaccination rates up.
I think that's constitutional? Because in New York City, where de Blasio just said in some communities like Brooklyn, he's going to start mandatory vaccinations, they are preparing right now a fight against this. And we saw this with a similar initiative in Rockland County that a judge struck down.
I think it's unfortunate if we go down that route, because I think it's going to play right into the fears of people who don't believe in vaccinations, that if you come in with a federal mandate or even state mandates. So I think the preferred solution is education, but we see vaccination rates tipping below 80%, which is the magic threshold, at least for measles, where you're going to start to see outbreaks below that threshold. Clark County was down at 78%, and you started to see the outbreaks there. So we're reaching a dangerous point where there's enough pockets of under-vaccination that we have the potential now for a national outbreak of measles.
And what happens? Is there some kind of national emergency declaration? In other words, like you said, if you can't go out there with a regulation or a forced vaccination, what solutions are there other than the schools? I mean, at age 5, maybe that kicks in. Maybe some daycares do their own thing, but it's going to be piecemeal.
Right. Well, you could declare a public health emergency. Certainly, if you had a national outbreak, you would do that. But there are ways to contemplate, for example, tying federal aid to districts based on certain vaccination rates. So there are ways that you could do this from policy to try to incentivize local districts to do more, to try to compel, encourage vaccination. I still think the preferable route is to try to educate and talk about these issues, because I think if you come in with some kind of mandate, it's going to play right into the fears of those who have reluctance to begin with, and I think that'd be a bad public policy outcome.
All right. Dr. Gottlieb,
Thanks
thank you so much.
Thank you.